Hello, you're watching Teaching Tips, and I'm your host, Dr. Twianie Roberts. Today on Teaching Tips, we'll be discussing vetting resources. As teachers, we are exposed to a variety of resources, whether in the form of teaching or studying the Word. Oftentimes, we come across books, online resources, videos, music, and plays. Before presenting any of the resources to your students, or even studying them yourself, it is important to make sure that the resources are vetted. When we vet, we make a careful and critical examination of it. Synonyms for vetting include to check, examine, scrutinize, investigate, inspect. We want to make sure we truly evaluate any resource that we bring or incorporate into our classrooms. As teachers, we are exposed to a variety of resources, whether in the form of books, film, websites, material produced by our students, YouTube clips, music, presentations, which includes dance, even news articles. As teachers, we see a plethora of resources. These resources must be vetted and approved to ensure that they are accurate and they are appropriate for our students and for the setting. This brings us to teaching tip number 1 when looking at any resource. Teaching tip 1. Is the resource biblically accurate? Teachers, our tip 1, always check resources and students' presentations and responses for biblical accuracy. We have to check accuracy not only with resources that we bring into class, but also checking accuracy for what students are saying. In the slide that we have, or the picture, we see 2 individuals holding up someone's hands. It states Moses, Nadab, and Abihu. Is this particular resource biblically accurate? The answer is no. It was Aaron and Hur who upheld Moses' hand in Exodus chapter 17, not Nadab and Abihu. Tip number 2. Ask, is the resource free from errors or misconceptions? The word of the Lord states in Acts chapter 17, verses 10 and 11, and the brethren immediately sent away Paul and Silas by night unto Berea, who coming thither went into the synagogue of the Jews. These were more noble than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness of mind, and searched the scriptures daily, whether those things were so. As a teacher, we must bring in resources that are free from errors and misconceptions, but in doing so, we must, like the Bereans, search the scriptures daily to see whether things which are stated are so. Tip number 3 for vetting. Does the resource or activity add to the knowledge base or enhance the lesson? We want to ensure as teachers that we are avoiding busy work. When we look at activities in class, like word searches or crossword puzzles, we have to ask ourselves, after completing this activity, does the student know any more about the lesson than when before they started it? Or are they just engaging in an activity? This leads us to tip number 4. Does the resource or activity address the lesson aim or the content? As we look at a Sunday school lesson entitled God Prunes and Grafts, our lesson aim specifically tells us our goal, our intent, the purpose of the lesson. The purpose of the lesson is to know the details of Paul's teaching about who are the true inheritors of God's promise. The lesson aim deals with affirming, and the lesson aim deals with developing. So we have to ask ourselves as teachers, whatever activity our students are involved or engaged in, does it address the lesson aim? Tip number 5 for vetting an activity. Does the resource or activity fit within the lesson time, or is it time consuming? Showing a movie that is related to the children of Israel's deliverance from Egypt may be a wonderful idea, but if it does not fit within the allocated time, or if it's too time consuming, then it may not be the appropriate activity for an in-class event. This may be an activity that you assign to the students a week before class to give them the opportunity to watch the entire movie or video even before they get to class, and then have a discussion regarding it. Tip number 6, is the resource or activity age appropriate for my class or my students? We want to ensure that if we are bringing activities or resources in, that it takes into account the age, the developmental level, the maturity level of your students. Tip number 7 for vetting. Ask yourselves, does the resource or activity address the student's learning style or the best way that they learn? If your resource or activity involves you lecturing to the students for 45 minutes to an hour, but you know that your class is composed primarily of 6 and 7-year-olds, your activity may not match up with the learning style or the attention span of your student, especially if you know that your students are hands-on students. They are tactile kinesthetic, and they like to get up and to move and to be actively engaged in the learning process. Tip 8 for vetting resources. Is the resource or activity interesting, informative, enlightening? As teachers, we want to make sure that we engage our students in the learning process. This involves bringing in resources that would connect or engage our students. If we know that our students are particularly interested or they're engaged when there are discussions that take place in class, then we want to try to engage students at a place in which they are interested and they will be informed. Let's review our teaching tips for today. Teaching tip number 1, related to vetting resources. Is the resource biblically accurate? Is the resource free from errors or misconceptions? Does the resource add to the student's knowledge base? We want to make sure that we avoid busy work. Does the resource or activity address the lesson aim? With a lesson on Jonah, we want to make sure that the lesson activity deals with Jonah. Does the resource or activity fit within the time, or is it too time consuming? We want to make sure that whatever we choose fits within the allocated time. Is the resource or activity age appropriate for my class and my students? Tip number 7. Does the resource address my students' learning styles or the best way that they learn. If I have a class that is filled with tactile kinesthetic learners, they're the kind of learners that like to get up and to do and to have hands-on activities, then I want to make sure that I give activities or have resources that allow them to do just that. And tip number 8, is the resource or activity interesting, informative, and enlightening? I pray that these teaching tips on vetting educational resources have been a blessing for you on today. To purchase the books associated with the teaching tips, go to www.walkintheword.dc.com/store. Be richly blessed.